One quiet evening, a moment of closeness revealed hidden layers, shifting everything we thought we knew. It was a Saturday night, and the house felt unusually still, the kind of quiet that only amplifies the small sounds, the ticking clock, the hum of passing cars. I could hear Mom's soft footsteps in the kitchen as she moved around, preparing something for us. Dad had called earlier to say he'd be late, and as I flipped through the channels on the couch, I had a feeling that tonight would be one of those rare, cozy evenings, just Mom and me. As I scrolled through channels, unable to find anything that could hold my interest, Mom walked in with 2 plates, her face lighting up with that familiar smile. She'd made grilled cheese sandwiches cut into perfect triangles, just like she used to when I was a kid. I couldn't help but smile back, feeling a sudden rush of nostalgia. "Movie night," she suggested, raising an eyebrow as she set the plates down on the coffee table. I nodded eagerly, grateful for the chance to unwind and enjoy some time with her. We hardly ever had these evenings to ourselves, and I'd almost forgotten how much I enjoyed them. Mom settled in beside me, and we started browsing through our movie options, arguing playfully over which one to pick. Eventually, we settled on an old mystery thriller, something neither of us had seen but had heard good things about. The room was dim, with only the soft glow of the screen casting shadows on the walls, adding to the suspenseful atmosphere. We sat in comfortable silence, munching on our sandwiches as the story unfolded. But I noticed Mom kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting something. Waiting for Dad, I asked, raising an eyebrow. She hesitated, then shook her head with a small smile. "Not really, just, I don't know. It feels like tonight's different somehow." I shrugged, brushing it off, but her words stuck with me. Maybe it was the movie, or the fact that the house was unusually quiet, but something about her comment sent a shiver down my spine. Halfway through the movie, just as the plot was starting to pick up, Mom paused the screen, her face thoughtful. "Do you remember that box of letters we found in the attic last summer?" she asked, a glint of curiosity in her eyes. I did. We'd been cleaning out some old junk when we stumbled upon a dusty cardboard box tucked away in a corner. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in neat, flowing handwriting that didn't look like anyone I knew. We'd both been fascinated, reading a few before putting them back, promising we'd look through them more carefully someday. "Want to go find it?" she asked, a hint of excitement in her voice. I didn't need convincing. We abandoned the movie and headed up to the attic, the stairs excitement in her voice. I didn't need convincing. We abandoned the movie and headed up to the attic, the stairs creaking under our weight. The attic was musty, filled with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and a few stray cobwebs clinging to the rafters. Mom flicked on a small light bulb, and there it was, the box sitting in the exact same spot we'd left it. We lugged it back downstairs, setting it on the coffee table. Mom opened the lid carefully, as if handling something fragile, and we both peered inside. The letters were yellowed with age, some tied together with faded ribbons, others loose and scattered. We took out a handful and started reading, each one a window into the past. The letters were addressed to a woman named Eleanor, and they told the story of a young couple separated by circumstances beyond their control. Some were filled with longing, others with frustration, but every letter had an intensity that made me feel like I was peeking into someone's soul. I glanced at Mom, noticing how absorbed she was, her eyes scanning each page with rapt attention. "Who do you think she was?" I whispered, not wanting to break the spell. Mom shrugged, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know, but it feels like she was someone important." As we continued reading, the letters took on a darker tone. They mentioned secrets, betrayals, and an unspoken tension that seemed to linger between the lines. It felt as though we were unraveling a mystery, one that had been hidden away for years, waiting to be discovered. I could tell that Mom was just as intrigued as I was, her fingers brushing over the pages as if she could somehow connect to the past through them. And then we found it, a letter that sent a chill down my spine. It was different from the others, written in a shaky hand, the words hurried and frantic. It was a warning, a plea, begging Eleanor to leave town, to stay away from someone who was dangerous. I looked at Mom, my heart pounding. "Do you think this is real?" She nodded slowly, her eyes wide. I think we just uncovered something serious." For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of the discovery settling over us. It was as if we'd opened a door to the past, one that should have yet closed. The house felt colder, the silence pressing in around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somehow the secrets in those letters had reached out across time to touch us. Just then, the phone rang, shattering the quiet. We both jumped, exchanging nervous glances before Mom picked it up. It was Dad, letting us know he'd be home soon. She put the phone down, her hand still trembling slightly. "Maybe we should put these back," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, suddenly eager to close the box and push it back into the shadows where it belonged. But as we gathered the letters, one of them slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I picked it up, glancing at the words scrawled across the page. "If you're reading this, it's too late." A chill ran down my spine. I looked at Mom, and she stared back at me, her face pale. "Let's put it away," she whispered, her voice tense. We hurriedly packed the letters back into the box, shoving it into the corner of the room. The atmosphere had shifted. The warmth of the evening had vanished, replaced by a sense of unease that clung of the room. The atmosphere had shifted. The warmth of the evening had vanished, replaced by a sense of unease that clung to the walls. We returned to the couch, but neither of us mentioned the letters again. When Dad finally came home, his usual warmth and laughter filled the room, but I couldn't shake the lingering dread that had settled over me. I kept thinking about the warning, about the mystery we'd uncovered, and the strange sense that our lives had somehow become entangled with a story from the past. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but feel like we'd disturbed something that was meant to stay hidden. The words echoed in my mind, haunting me in the silence. "If you're reading this, it's too late." But this was just the beginning. Little did I know, there was so much more to come. The following day was one of those days where nothing felt quite right. I went about my usual routine, but something had shifted since last night. The letters, those haunting words, seemed to have left an imprint on my mind, lingering like a shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, in reading them, we had crossed a line. Mom and I barely spoke about what happened, though I could tell it had affected her too. She moved through the day in silence, her usual cheer replaced with a quiet tension. And every time our eyes met, it felt like we were sharing a secret too heavy to bear. I wanted to ask her about it, to talk it through, but the words wouldn't come. How do you even begin to explain a feeling like this? It didn't help that Dad seemed oblivious, completely unaware of the undercurrent that had taken hold of our household. As he sat at the breakfast table, reading the paper and sipping his coffee, he looked perfectly at ease, like it was any other morning. But Mom and I were on edge, exchanging glances over our cups of coffee, silently wondering if we should tell him about the letters. I felt like I was carrying something dangerous, something that could shift everything if spoken aloud. Later that afternoon, as I tried to focus on my homework, Mom appeared in the doorway, her face unreadable. She seemed hesitant, like she was about to say something important, but wasn't sure how to start. "Hey, can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. I nodded, closing my textbook and following her downstairs. She led me to the living room where the box of letters still sat, untouched since last night. I felt a strange tightening in my chest as I looked at it, a mix of curiosity and dread. Mom noticed my reaction and gave me a reassuring smile, though I could tell she was just as uneasy. "About last night," she began, her voice trailing off. "I know it might sound strange, but I can't shake the feeling that those letters are connected to us somehow." I frowned, not entirely sure what she meant. Connected? How? She sighed, running a hand through her hair as she searched for the right words. "I don't know. Maybe it's just my imagination, but something about them feels familiar. Maybe it's just my imagination, but something about them feels familiar. Like they're part of our story, too." Her words hung in the air, filling the room with a heavy silence. I didn't know what to say. The idea was absurd, yet somehow I couldn't dismiss it entirely. There was something about those letters, something that had stirred something deep within us. But what could that connection be? Just as I was about to respond, the front door opened and we both turned to see Dad walking in. He looked at us with a curious expression, clearly sensing the tension. "Everything all right?" he asked, his gaze flicking between Mom and me. Mom forced a smile, nodding quickly. "Yes, of course. We were just talking." Dad didn't seem convinced, but he let it go, heading into the kitchen. As soon as he was out of sight, Mom turned back to me, her eyes filled with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "Promise me you won't mention the letters to him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I hesitated, caught off guard by her request. "Why not?" She shook her head, looking away. "I can't explain it, but I just have a feeling. Please, trust me." Reluctantly, I nodded, agreeing to keep our secret. But even as I promised, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much larger, something that would change everything. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew. Mom became more withdrawn, spending hours locked in her room with the letters, poring over them like they held the answers to some unspoken question. I tried to carry on as usual, but it was impossible to ignore the shift in her demeanor, the way she seemed consumed by whatever secrets those letters contained. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find Mom standing there, looking exhausted but determined. She glanced over her shoulder, as if making sure Dad wasn't nearby, before stepping into my room and closing the door behind her. "I think I figured something out," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. I sat down on the edge of my bed, watching her closely. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "I think the letters. They're connected to our family. Somehow, they're tied to something that happened long before we were born. Something that's been hidden away all these years." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "But how do you know that?" She hesitated, glancing down at her hands. "I don't have proof exactly. It's just a feeling, but I can't ignore it. The names in those letters, the places mentioned, they match with things from our family history, things I've heard in passing from relatives over the years. It's as if these letters were meant for us, like they're part of our story too." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to dismiss her theory as impossible, but another part, the part that had felt that strange connection to the letters the moment I saw them, knew she might be right. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, her expression filled with a determination I hadn't seen before. "We need to find out the truth. Whatever it is, we can't let this stay buried." For the next few nights, Mom and I spent hours sifting through the letters, piecing together fragments of a story that seemed to stretch across generations. We discovered names and places that matched with our family's history, hints of secrets that had been hidden away for years. It was like uncovering a mystery, one that had been waiting for us to solve. But the more we uncovered, the more I felt a growing sense of dread. It was as if we were tampering with something that was meant to stay hidden, as if the past was warning us to leave it alone. Mom didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. She was too consumed by the search, too determined to find answers. And then, one night, something happened that changed everything. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, when I heard a faint sound coming from downstairs. It was late, and the house was quiet, but I could hear the soft murmur of voices drifting up the stairs. Curious, I slipped out of bed and made my way to the top of the staircase, straining to hear. The voices were coming from the living room, and as I listened, I realized it was Mom and Dad. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I caught fragments enough to know they were talking about the letters. "What are you hiding from me?" Dad's voice was tense, filled with frustration. Mom's response was muffled, but I could hear the fear in her voice. "It's complicated. I don't want you to worry." There was a long pause, and then Dad spoke again, his voice low and cold. "I deserve to know the truth. I'm your husband. If there's something going on, you need to tell me." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. I held my breath, waiting, but Mom didn't respond. The silence stretched on, and then I heard the sound of footsteps, followed by the door slamming shut. Dad had left. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding as I tried to process what had just happened. The tension that had been building for days had finally reached its breaking point, and I had a feeling that nothing would ever be the same as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't shake the image of Mom's face, the fear in her eyes as she tried to keep her secrets hidden. Whatever she had discovered in those letters, it was powerful enough to tear our family apart, and I was left wondering if I would ever learn the truth, or if it would remain a mystery buried in the past. But somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. The real story had yet to unfold. After that night, a strange silence settled over the house. Dad was absent more often, coming home late from work or spending extra time out. Mom withdrew even further, barely saying a word to either of us. The tension between them was almost unbearable, like a thread stretched so tightly it would snap at any moment. I kept my distance, not wanting to get tangled up in whatever was happening, but it was hard to ignore the subtle changes. I spent most of my time in my room, hiding behind my schoolwork or scrolling through my phone, trying to escape the feeling that everything was falling apart. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Something had shifted between all of us, and the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger that pull became. Of us, and the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger that pull became. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft knock on my door. The sound was hesitant, barely audible, but it was enough to make my heart race. I knew it was Mom before I even opened the door, sensing her presence as she stood there, her face lit only by the faint glow of the hallway light. "Hey," she whispered, her voice soft and almost pleading. "Hey," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. She looked tired, her eyes shadowed, and her hair slightly messy, like she hadn't slept in days. Without saying another word, she sat down on the edge of my bed, pulling her legs up and hugging her knees. I closed the door, feeling the weight of the unspoken words hanging between us. It was rare for her to be in my room, especially this late, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just the letters or the argument with Dad. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, both of us staring at the floor. It was like we were caught in a moment that was too fragile to break, a shared understanding that neither of us could put into words. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else I couldn't quite name. "Do you ever feel like everything is changing too fast?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Yeah, sometimes it feels like I can't keep up." She sighed, resting her head on her knees as she looked at me with a faint smile. "I guess that's part of growing up, but sometimes it feels like we're losing pieces of ourselves along the way." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and I found myself leaning closer, drawn in by the softness in her voice. There was a vulnerability in her that I hadn't seen before, a side of her that she usually kept hidden. It made me feel closer to her, like we were sharing something deeper than just words. Without thinking, I reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. And for a moment, neither of us moved. There was something unspoken between us, a quiet understanding that went beyond words. She didn't pull away. Instead, she shifted slightly, leaning into my touch as if seeking comfort. I felt my heart beat a little faster, aware of how close we were. Her face was inches from mine, her eyes searching mine with a look I couldn't quite decipher. The air between us felt charged, filled with an intensity that neither of us seemed willing to break. And then, almost without realizing it, I leaned in, my gaze dropping to her lips. She didn't pull back, didn't look away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her breath soft and warm against my skin. It was a brief, almost hesitant moment, but it felt like everything was happening in slow motion, as if the world had shrunk down to just the two of us. My heart raced, each beat echoing in my ears as I closed the gap between us. The kiss was soft, tentative, a gentle brush of lips that was over almost as soon as it began. But the feeling lingered, a warmth spreading through me that left me breathless. I pulled back, my face flushed, unsure of what to say. She looked at me with wide eyes, her expression a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite read. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both of us caught in the aftermath of what had just happened. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice barely audible. She shook her head, her gaze softening as she reached up to touch my face, her fingers warm against my skin. "You don't have to be sorry," she murmured, her voice filled with a gentleness that made my chest ache. "It's okay." Her gentle words calmed my inner turmoil, soothing my soul. She leaned in, her hand cradling my cheek, and our lips met in a deeper, more meaningful kiss. It transcended the physical, forging an unbreakable bond between us. In that timeless moment, our hearts entwined, lost in each other's embrace. The world outside dissolved, leaving only our shared connection. Time stood still, as if the universe had narrowed to just us two, bound by an unspoken understanding. Her tender touch ignited a sense of safety, enveloping me in warmth. Every worry dissolved, leaving only the gentle softness of her love. Our bodies swayed together, melting into an ocean of emotions. In her loving grasp, I found solace, a sense of belonging. Our love became the only reality, filling every space between us. Eventually, she pulled back, her face flushed, but there was a smile on her lips, a warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I smiled back, feeling a strange mix of emotions that I couldn't quite name. It was as if something had shifted between us, something that felt both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet gratitude. "For what?" I asked, still a little breathless. "For being here," she replied, her gaze soft and filled with an affection that made my heart ache. "I don't know what I would do without you." Her words left me speechless, and I found myself reaching out to take her hand, squeezing it gently. We sat there in silence, letting the moment wash over us, both of us understanding that things would never be the same. There was a new closeness between us, a bond that went beyond anything we had shared before. After a while, she stood up, giving me one last, lingering look before heading to the door. I watched her go, my mind racing with everything that had just happened, the weight of it settling over me like a warm blanket. As she left, she glanced back, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Good night," she whispered, her voice soft and filled with a warmth that lingered long after she was gone. "Good night," I replied, watching as she disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I lay awake for hours after that, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of what had just happened. It felt surreal, like a dream I couldn't quite grasp, but the memory of her touch, her warmth, stayed with me, filling me with a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The next morning, everything felt different. There was a new ease between us, a quiet understanding that seemed to flow naturally. We didn't talk about what had happened, didn't try to define it or put it into words. Instead, we moved through the day as if nothing had changed, but I could feel the shift in every glance, every touch, every quiet moment we shared. It was as if we had crossed an invisible line, one that couldn't be undone. And even though part of me felt uncertain, another part, the part that had felt that connection, knew that I wouldn't change a thing. As the days passed, we found ourselves drawn together in small, subtle ways. A lingering touch, a quiet smile, a shared look that spoke volumes. It was a connection that needed no words, a bond that seemed to deepen with each passing day. But even as we settled into this new closeness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was waiting, something that would test everything we had built. And in the back of my mind, the memory of the letters lingered, a reminder that the past had a way of creeping back when you least expected it. And so, we continued on, navigating this uncharted territory together, both of us aware that the story wasn't over yet. There was more to come, more that would shape the path we had chosen. But for now, we held on to the moments we shared, letting them fill the empty spaces that had once kept us apart. The next few days passed in a strange blur, the lines between what was familiar and what was new blurring, until I could hardly tell one from the other. I moved through the house in a daze, part of me wondering if everything that had happened was just some vivid dream. But every time I saw her, every time our eyes met, I knew it was real. The quiet moments we shared, the subtle touches and glances, they all lingered, filling the air with an unspoken promise that made my heart race. Even though we didn't talk about it, the connection between us was undeniable. It was like a silent understanding, a language we spoke without words. There was something comforting about the way she'd pass by, her fingers grazing mine as if by accident, her gaze lingering just a little longer than necessary. Each moment felt fragile, like it might shatter if we acknowledged it aloud, so we kept it safe, tucked away in the spaces between us. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the house in a warm, golden glow, I found her sitting in the garden, surrounded by the soft hum of the evening breeze. She looked peaceful, almost ethereal, surrounded by the soft hum of the evening breeze. She looked peaceful, almost ethereal, her face lit by the fading light. Without thinking, I stepped outside, the grass soft beneath my feet, as I made my way over to her. She looked up as I approached, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Couldn't stay away, huh?" she teased, her voice light, but filled with that familiar warmth. I laughed, feeling a rush of relief that she was just as at ease as I was. "Not when you're out here all alone," I replied, settling down beside her. We sat there in comfortable silence, the sounds of the world around us fading into the background as we simply enjoyed each other's company. It felt like we were the only two people of the world around us fading into the background as we simply enjoyed each other's company. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, like nothing else mattered. I could feel the tension easing, replaced by a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in a long time. After a while, she reached out, her hand finding mine in the quiet darkness. Her fingers were warm, her touch steady, and I felt a sense of belonging settle over me. There were no words needed. Everything we wanted to say was already understood. I leaned my head against her shoulder, closing my eyes as I let myself sink into the comfort of the moment. But as much as I wanted to stay like this forever, into the comfort of the moment. But as much as I wanted to stay like this forever, reality had a way of creeping back in. I could sense the weight of the past still lingering, a shadow that refused to be ignored. I thought back to those letters, to the secrets we'd uncovered, and I knew that we couldn't hide from them forever. Whatever had been buried in those pages, it was something that demanded to be faced. The days turned into weeks, and we continued to drift through this delicate balance, each of us aware of the unspoken understanding that tied us together. But even as we grew closer, the tension in the house only seemed to grow. Mom's quiet determination was a constant reminder that there were still questions left unanswered, mysteries that we couldn't ignore. And then, one evening, as I was finishing up some work in my room, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find her standing there, a look of quiet resolve on her face. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with an intensity that made my heart race. I nodded, following her to the living room where we sat down on the couch. She took a deep breath, as if preparing herself, and then she began to speak, her words measured and careful. "I know this has been difficult," she said, her gaze fixed on the floor. "But there's something I need to tell you, something I've kept hidden for a long time." I felt a knot form in my stomach, sensing that this was something big. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue, my mind racing with possibilities. She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. Those letters we found, they're connected to our family in ways I didn't realize until recently. They're part of a history that I tried to forget, but it's clear that we can't move forward without facing it. Her words hung in the air, and I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about the letters, it was about something much deeper, something that had been buried for years. She took a deep breath, her gaze steady as she looked at me. "There were things I never told you. Things about my past, about choices I made, about people I left behind. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, listening, my heart pounding as she spoke. She told me about a time before I was born, a time when she had been a different person, living a different life. She talked about the people she had known, the mistakes she had made, and the secrets she had kept hidden. It was like peeling back the layers of a story I thought I knew, only to discover that there was so much more beneath the surface. Her words were filled with regret, but also with a quiet strength that made me see her in a new light. She wasn't just my mother. She was a person with a past, a history that had shaped her in ways I was only beginning to understand. When she finished, she looked at me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before, as if waiting for me to judge her. But all I felt was a deep sense of compassion, an understanding that went beyond words. I reached out, taking her hand in mine, and she squeezed it, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we shared. "Thank you for telling me," I whispered, my voice filled with a quiet gratitude. She smiled, a faint, bittersweet smile that spoke of 1,000 unspoken emotions. We sat there in silence, letting the weight of her words settle, both of us aware that we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. In the days that followed, the tension in the house began to ease. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a shadow dispelled by the light of understanding. We didn't talk about it much after that night, but the bond between us had changed, deepened by the shared knowledge of the past. As time went on, life slowly returned to normal. We found a new rhythm, a balance that allowed us to move forward without forgetting what we had learned. There were still moments of quiet reflection, times when we would sit together in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. But there was also a sense of peace, a feeling that we had finally found a way to navigate the complexities of our relationship. And though we never spoke of it again, I knew that those moments we shared, the quiet closeness, the unspoken understanding, would always be a part of us. They were the threads that bound us together, the ties that kept us grounded even as we moved forward. In the end, it wasn't the answers we found that mattered, but the journey we took to get there. It was the nights spent in quiet reflection, the shared glances, the gentle touches, the understanding that grew between us. Shared glances, the gentle touches, the understanding that grew between us. These were the moments that defined us, the memories that would stay with us long after everything else had faded. And as I look back on those days, I realized that what we had shared was something rare, something that went beyond words or explanations. It was a bond forged in silence, a connection that would remain unspoken but forever understood. I knew, as I closed this chapter of my life, that there would always be a part of me that carried those memories with me. They were a part of who I was, a part of who we were, and they would always be there, a quiet reminder of the journey we had taken together.
Subscribe to my channel.